1629, a Dutch treasure ship struck a reef off the coast of a desolate chain of islands. Hundreds survived the wreck, but survival was only the beginning. Stranded without law, without rescue, and without certainty, the survivors faced a new reality. One where power shifted quickly, trust became dangerous, and leadership meant the difference between life or death. Many would disappear, some would rise, and one man would see opportunity in the silence. What unfolded on those islands would become one of the most disturbing chapters in maritime history. A story of ambition, manipulation, and the thin line between order and chaos. But before we go any further, if you enjoy deeply researched true crime, historical mysteries, and stories that explore the darker edges of human behavior, we release new documentaries every week. Subscribing ensures you won't miss the next investigation. Because this isn't just a shipwreck story, it's a question. When structure collapses, what kind of people emerge? This is the story of the Batavia. The 17th century marked the Dutch Golden Age, a period when the Netherlands, though geographically small, dominated the world through trade, finance, and maritime prowess. Cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Middelburg were bustling centers of commerce. Their canals teemed with ships carrying spices, silk, precious metals, and luxury goods across Europe, Africa, and Asia. This prosperity was fueled by a single revolutionary institution, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, or VOC, the Dutch East India Company. Unlike any corporation of its time, the VOC wielded sovereign powers. It could negotiate treaties, establish colonies, wage war, and imprison or execute convicts. Its ships patrolled the seas armed to protect trade routes and Dutch interests against rival European powers. Investors bought shares in voyages, giving them stakes in overseas trade profits and the risks involved. In doing so, the VOC became the world's first publicly traded company, a precursor to modern corporations that would reshape global commerce. The VOC's success relied on a complex web of hierarchies, contracts, and ruthless efficiency. For the company, the stakes were enormous. A single lost ship could mean millions of guilders in cargo and capital, and trade routes built over decades thrown into jeopardy. Soldiers, sailors, and merchants were carefully chosen, but once they reached the East Indies, the distant colonies where the company extracted its wealth, survival was never guaranteed. Disease, poor nutrition, storms, and local resistance claimed countless lives. Salaries were modest and pensions rare, forcing men to rely on ambition, cunning, and sometimes underhanded tactics to secure wealth. Yet the VOC's dominance was not just military or financial. Its employees studied local languages, cultures, and botanical knowledge, enabling trade and diplomacy across unfamiliar lands. Merchants like Francisco Pelsart, the man who would later command the Batavia, were trained to combine commerce with negotiation and sometimes morally questionable strategies to achieve the company's goals. Amid this mix of ambition, danger, and opportunity, the VOC commissioned a new ship, the Batavia, named after its key headquarters in Java. More than a vessel, she was a symbol, a floating extension of Dutch power, built to carry enormous treasure and influence to the East Indies. Her mission was clear: connect Europe and Asia through commerce and bring immense wealth back to the Netherlands. The Batavia was not just another ship in the VOC fleet. She was the pinnacle of Dutch naval engineering, designed to endure long voyages across the most treacherous seas while carrying immense treasure. Constructed at the Pepperwharf shipyard in Amsterdam, one of the largest and most efficient wharves in Europe, she measured roughly 150 feet in length, built to the upper limits typical for large VOC vessels of the era, with a triple hull rising 40 feet above the waterline. Her outer shell was made of pine, treated to resist shipworms, a constant threat in tropical waters. The Batavia had 4 decks, 3 masts, and 30 cannons, making her both a merchant vessel and a formidable warship. She could carry over 300 people, though voyages often crammed even more passengers on board. To project Dutch power, the ship's bow bore a ferocious carved lion, while the stern displayed elaborate carvings of famous Dutch military leaders, symbols of the homeland and its military legacy. Even amid the company's reputation for frugality, these flourishes demonstrated that the Dutch valued prestige as much as profit. Command was split among 3 essential figures. Francisco Pelsart, the upper merchant, was responsible for all cargo and commercial negotiations. The under merchant handled local trading arrangements and financial records, while Captain Arjan Jacobs oversaw navigation and crew discipline. On long voyages, these roles could conflict, but the VOC carefully selected men who could balance authority, diplomacy, and survival skills. Pelsart, in particular, had a reputation for intelligence and cunning. Fluent in multiple languages and seasoned in courtly diplomacy in India, he had built a reputation for measured negotiation and commercial strategy, though the extreme challenges ahead would test even his considerable skills. The Batavia was more than a vessel. She was a floating city of commerce and strategy. Her holds were packed with silver, spices, textiles, and other treasures from Europe bound for the East Indies. She was armed not just for defense, but to enforce the VOC's mercantile monopoly, patrolling the seas for Portuguese, English, and pirate competition. Every plank, cannon, and rope was accounted for a single misstep could doom the company's fortunes. Yet, even with meticulous design, seasoned leadership, and careful planning, the Batavia's fate was precarious. As survivor accounts suggest, tensions among the crew and passengers would prove as dangerous as the reefs themselves. The ship's construction may have been perfect, but the people aboard, the merchants, sailors, soldiers, and passengers, carried the seeds of chaos that would soon erupt, leaving a mark on history that would endure for centuries. The Batavia departed the Netherlands in October 1628, part of the VOC's Autumn Fleet, a carefully organized convoy designed to protect its most valuable assets. On board were hundreds of people, sailors, soldiers, merchants, women, and children, along with treasure beyond imagination, silver, textiles, spices, and trade goods intended to cement Dutch dominance in the East Indies. The voyage across the Indian Ocean promised wealth, prestige, and opportunity, but the open seas offered no guarantees. From the outset, conditions were harsh. Storms battered the decks, waves threatened to capsize the ship, and tensions simmered beneath a growing power struggle between Pelsart, the upper merchant, and Captain Arjan Jacobs. While disagreements did arise among officers, historical sources do not confirm that Jacobs engaged in mutiny before the wreck, though later events would cast his conduct in a far darker light. Long months at sea tested endurance. Rations were controlled, discipline was strict, and unease lingered below deck as the Batavia pushed deeper into unfamiliar waters. As the fleet neared the Houtman Abrolhos, a chain of isolated reefs off the western coast of Australia, the dangers intensified. These waters were uncharted and notoriously treacherous. mariners relied on rudimentary maps, observations of the stars, and years of experience to navigate them. Even the smallest error could be catastrophic. In the early hours of June 4th, 1629, disaster struck. The Batavia ran aground on a hidden reef. The hull splintered as the ship slammed into the coral. Water rushed in and panic erupted. Screams filled the night as passengers struggled to escape the flooding decks. Lifeboats were few and chaos reigned. Hundreds drowned, while the fortunate few clung to wreckage or swam to nearby barren islands. The survivors faced a terrifying new reality. The islands offered no fresh water, almost no food, and no natural shelter. Under a merciless sun, survivors scavenged wreckage and rationed what little remained. While natural dangers were immense, a more insidious threat was starting to emerge among the survivors themselves. The seeds of human ambition and cruelty that could prove as deadly as the reefs. According to Pelsart's account, Geronimus Cornelis appeared to take control, though the full truth is difficult to verify. A former VOC apothecary, Cornelis had ambition far beyond his station. Observing the chaos, he saw opportunity. Control the survivors, seize the treasure, and manipulate the lawless conditions to his advantage. Small acts of intimidation became organized terror. He began isolating dissenters, forming alliances among the weak and fearful, and subtly asserting authority over the group. Meanwhile, Pelsart assessed the situation with the eye of a seasoned merchant. Understanding the magnitude of the disaster and the threat posed by Cornelis, he knew that staying on the islands would spell catastrophe. Supplies were limited, and the survivors were vulnerable to both the environment and human cruelty. Pelsart made a critical decision that would define the next chapter. He would embark on an almost impossible journey across open ocean to summon aid from Batavia, leaving the islands in the hands of those still capable of maintaining order. The voyage was over. The real catastrophe was just beginning. As the Batavia lay shattered upon the reefs of the Houtman Nabrolos, chaos gave way to something far more sinister. The survivors were marooned on barren coral islands, and in the vacuum of authority, Cornelis saw opportunity. Cornelis was no ordinary castaway. A bankrupt merchant with radical religious leanings and apocalyptic beliefs, he was a man who believed catastrophe could be transformed into power. Methodical and patient, he began consolidating control almost immediately. He positioned himself as the arbiter of survival, deciding who ate, who labored, and who lived. The weak, the fearful, and the ambitious were identified and recruited. Those who resisted were marked. The early murders were calculated. Victims were lured away under false pretenses, sent to gather food or water, only to be stabbed, strangled, beaten, drowned, or pushed from cliffs. Some deaths were staged as accidents, creating fear without obvious blame. Cornelis did not personally commit every killing. Most were carried out by loyal followers acting under his orders, but each death bore his design. Each removed opposition while reinforcing his dominance. Women, children, and the elderly were among the most vulnerable and were systematically targeted. The killings were not chaotic, but deliberate, designed to terrorize the remaining survivors into submission. Children were killed not in chaos but by design. In one chilling episode, he attempted to have an infant poisoned, a calculated effort to remove what he saw as a burden and to demonstrate absolute dominance. The plan failed when others intervened. Tragically, the infant did not survive. He was deliberately strangled by members of Cornelis's faction, a death meant to terrorize the remaining survivors. Those loyal to the Dutch East India Company or to Commander Francisco Pelsart were systematically eliminated or sent on deadly errands. Survivors were isolated on smaller islands without food or water, left to die slowly of starvation and exposure. Executions were often carried out publicly. Cornelis understood that fear could achieve what weapons alone could not. Over the weeks, well over 100 people would be dead. Cornelis fostered paranoia. He turned survivors against one another, offering protection and reward for obedience while framing others as threats. Suspicion became constant. No one knew whose name would be called next. Among the captives was Ukrisha Jans, who endured his control and later gave testimony used in the VOC trials about the horrors she witnessed. Survival meant silence. Yet his rule was not absolute. Cornelis had sent a group of soldiers to a neighboring island under the pretense of searching for water, assuming isolation would neutralize any threat they posed. Instead, that decision created the nucleus of resistance. Historical sources identified their leader as Wiebe Hayes. Hayes and his men discovered a freshwater spring, along with small but sustainable food sources, likely shellfish, seabirds, and sparse vegetation. The find gave them a strategic advantage over Cornelis's increasingly desperate faction. Using coral blocks, limestone, and salvaged materials from the wreck, they constructed a rudimentary fortification, one of the earliest known European structures in Australia. Hayes emerged as the de facto commander of the defenders. Calm and disciplined, he organized the soldiers, trained them in improvised combat, and developed tactical strategies using rocks, spears, and salvaged weapons. When Cornelis launched armed assaults to assert dominance, Hayes' group repelled them repeatedly. Courage and discipline replaced fear. Moral integrity replaced manipulation. This resistance was critical. Hayes's fort prevented Cornelis from gaining total control of all survivors, fracturing the mutineers' authority and contributing directly to his eventual defeat. Meanwhile, Pelsart's departure had not been abandonment. After failing to locate fresh water on the main islands, he made a desperate decision to sail for help. The voyage to the city of Batavia, the VOC's headquarters in the East Indies, lasted roughly 33 days in an open longboat, covering nearly 900 nautical miles. The journey secured rescue, but the time required to organize and return with a ship meant weeks passed before aid could arrive. Unaware that lawful authority was already on its way back across the ocean, Cornelis continued tightening his grip, even contemplating the elimination of all remaining survivors to claim the ship's treasure for himself and a loyal few. But cracks were widening. Some of his followers argued. Scarcity bred tension. Small acts of defiance multiplied. The horror of the mutiny was not madness, it was calculation. On those sun-scorched islands, morality was not lost, it was deliberately dismantled. Cornelis chose control, he chose fear. Yet against that terror stood discipline, courage, and resistance. And it was that resistance, led by Hayes, that ensured Cornelis's empire of violence would not endure. While violence unfolded on the islands, Pelsart's gamble at sea became a race against time. The longboat was crowded with nearly 50 men, Officers, sailors, and soldiers pressed into a vessel never designed for such a distance. Space was scarce, provisions tightly rationed, and discipline essential. If even one element failed, navigation, weather judgment, or morale, the entire party would vanish into the Indian Ocean. The voyage demanded constant calculation. By day, the sun scorched exposed skin raw. By night, shifting winds and currents forced continual adjustment of course. Navigation relied on experience, celestial observation, and dead reckoning across open water with no margin for error. Coral reefs, sudden squalls, and exhaustion posed persistent threats. Yet despite the magnitude of the journey, not a single man was lost during the crossing, a remarkable feat given the era and conditions. On July 7, 1629, the longboat finally reached the port of Batavia, and the scale of the disaster became clear. Pelsart reported the wreck, the stranded survivors, and the urgent need for intervention. Authority now rested with Governor General Jan Petersen Kuhn, whose approval was essential for any rescue effort. Beyond the lives at stake, the wreck carried a fortune in silver and trade goods, assets the company could not afford to lose. A ship, the Sardam, was outfitted and dispatched to return to the Abrolhos with provisions, soldiers, and legal authority. Yet even in Batavia, time was an enemy. Ships required preparation, crews had to be assembled, and official approval formalized. Each delay, however necessary, allowed events on the islands to unfold unchecked. There was also an unspoken irony. In departing, Pelsart had left administrative authority in the hands of men he believed reliable. That decision, made under duress, created the vacuum Cornelis would exploit. By the time the Sardam turned back toward the wreck site, the situation waiting there had transformed from shipwreck into calculated massacre. Pelsart could not yet know the full scale of what had occurred, but the return voyage would not be a rescue alone. It would become a reckoning. When the Sardam sailed back toward the reefs of the Houtman Abrolhos, Pelsart returned not only with provisions and soldiers, but with legal authority. The Dutch East India Company intended to restore order, recover its treasure, and punish those responsible. What awaited him, however, was not merely the aftermath of a shipwreck, it was the aftermath of a calculated slaughter. By the time the Sardam anchored off the islands in September 1629, events had already shifted. Cornelis's campaign of terror had begun to fracture under resistance from the soldiers he had tried to isolate. Led by Wiebe Hayes, the defenders on the outer island had repeatedly repelled armed assaults. In a failed attack intended to crush that resistance, Cornelis was overpowered and captured by Hayes and his men. Bound and held prisoner, the architect of the mutiny awaited judgment before Pelsart ever set foot ashore. The timing was critical. The arrival as tensions remained high and violence had not entirely ceased. Survivors were divided, some coerced into complicity, others traumatized witnesses to weeks of murder. Of roughly 340 people aboard the Batavia, only a fraction remained alive. Approximately 40 had drowned during the wreck, and nearly 120 men, women, and children had been murdered under Cornelis's orders. Pelsart moved quickly. Authority was reasserted with precision. Guards secured key figures, weapons were confiscated, and survivors were separated to prevent renewed unrest. What followed were summary trials conducted on the islands themselves. Acting under the authority of the Dutch East India Company, Pelsart interrogated the accused, recording confessions and testimony. Judicial torture, common in 17th century legal practice, was used to extract admissions from several principal mutineers. Sentences were carried out swiftly. Cornelius and 6 of his principal accomplices were executed on the islands. Before his execution, Cornelius's right hand was amputated, a punishment intended both as retribution and warning, after which he was hanged. The executions were deliberate and public, reinforcing the company's authority over life and death in its territories. 2 lesser mutineers were marooned on the Australian mainland rather than executed, an act that may have made them the first Europeans known to have lived on the continent. Their ultimate fate remains unknown. Other accomplices were transported to Batavia for further trial and punishment. For the survivors, rescue brought relief, but not restoration. Many had been coerced into participation, others had witnessed the murder of family members. Trauma lingered long after order was restored. Yet without the resistance organized by Hayes, and without Pelsart's return, none would have survived. Pelsart returned to Batavia, having suppressed one of the most brutal mutinies in maritime history. His detailed reports preserved the record of what had occurred, yet the shadow of the Batavia lingered. He died in Batavia in 1630, scarcely a year after the ordeal, leaving behind a legacy inseparable from catastrophe. The mutiny of the Batavia stands as a stark study in power and its corruption. In isolation, stripped of law and oversight, fear became currency and violence became governance. But the story is not solely one of cruelty, it is also one of resistance, of soldiers who refused to yield, of survivors who endured, and of authority reasserted before destruction became total. On those remote coral islands, humanity revealed both its darkest impulses and its capacity for courage. The reckoning that followed ensured that the horror would not be forgotten, nor repeated without consequence. In the years after the Batavia disaster, the Dutch East India Company scrutinized its operations with renewed caution. Officer selection became stricter, emphasizing loyalty, temperament, and moral character, while crew oversight and long voyage protocols were reinforced. Though no sweeping public reforms were enacted, the events of 1629 exposed vulnerabilities within even the most disciplined organization, highlighting the fragility of authority when isolation meets human ambition. The courage and foresight of Wiebe Hayes became one of the defining legacies of the mutiny. By organizing resistance, fortifying positions, and maintaining discipline on the outer island, Hayes directly prevented Cornelius from seizing complete control and ensured key witnesses survived. His leadership demonstrated that strategic thinking and moral resolve can prevail even against calculated cruelty. By capturing Cornelius before Pelsart's return, Hayes enabled the VOC to administer justice effectively. He later resumed ordinary VOC service, yet his actions endure as a symbol of resilience and courage under extraordinary pressure. Centuries later, the Batavia's wreck became an archaeological treasure. Discovered in 1963, the remains preserved elements of one of the Dutch Republic's most advanced maritime vessels. Excavations recovered cannons, coins, textiles, and personal belongings, now displayed at the Western Australian Maritime Museum. These artifacts provide a tangible link to the human drama that unfolded, illustrating survival, cruelty, and endurance in extreme conditions. Psychologically, the mutiny reveals the extremes of human behavior. Cornelius, trained in logic, chemistry, and observation, chose premeditated savagery over cooperation, showing how intellect without morality can be catastrophic. By contrast, Pelsart's disciplined command, navigational skill, and ethical judgment demonstrate the capacity for reason and courage to preserve life and restore order. Hayes' resistance further reinforces this principle. Even in isolation, strategic leadership and moral courage can shape outcomes against formidable odds. Together, these figures illustrate the interplay of intellect, ethics, and leadership under pressure. For the survivors, memory was both refuge and burden. Many witnessed unspeakable violence, endured deprivation, and faced choices that tested the limits of conscience. Yet within these trials were moments of ingenuity, collaboration, and endurance that informed VOC policies, maritime practice, and historical understanding. Journals and trial records preserve their testimonies, offering insight into the psychological and practical realities of survival under lawless conditions. The story of the Batavia resonates far beyond maritime history. It is a tale of ambition and greed, moral collapse and violence, but also of leadership, resistance, and perseverance. Even in lawless, isolated conditions, choices carried profound consequences. From Pelsart's daring open-sea voyage to Hayes' disciplined defense, from Cornelis's manipulations to the quiet acts of defiance among survivors, every decision shaped the course of events. The Houtman Abrolhos remains a mirror of humanity under extreme stress, a testament to courage overcoming cruelty and to the enduring consequences of character when society collapses. Cornelis's empire of terror was undone not by chance, but by human courage, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, morality, discipline, and strategic thinking can endure. Next week, we reveal more unexplained stories, unsolved crimes, and secrets history forgot. Subscribe to dive deep into the extraordinary and the dark corners of our past. Thank you for watching.